Thank
No
you very
problem
much
at all.
for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for
The
having me.
stage is yours.
All right. Well, it's good to meet all of you, I guess, digitally. It's a little different this time than last time. But I definitely appreciate the opportunity. And of course, being able to do it here from Portugal helps a lot. So I was in Berlin for 3 years and met Thomas through that. And so, yeah, it's been a pleasure to be able to become friends with him and get an opportunity to speak with you today. So this presentation, as you can see here, is called Introduction to Bootstrapping and How I Did It. So I've done some similar presentations for Thomas with his class in the past, and it's been more about an introduction to bootstrapping and what it is, and giving some examples of the ways that you can do it. But I'm really happy this time to be able to give you some insights from my own personal experience building Expat Empire, which is the company I'm working on right now. So let's get into it. So for me, I'm originally from the United States. I left there in 2014, more permanently, let's say, to, I guess we'll see what the future holds, but I moved then to Tokyo, Japan, where I spent 2 years working there. Also had worked before in China for a couple months before that, and also studied abroad in Singapore. But after 2 years in Japan, then I moved to Germany, to Berlin for 3 years, and then moved here to Portugal about a year and a half ago. So I'd started my career in investment banking, but then after about 2 years of that, very tired of that, changed to product management, where I worked for a number of software, tech companies as a product manager. And I also started now Expat Empire, as I mentioned, to help people to move abroad. And so, of course, we'll talk about how I did that, why I did that, but that's just the big picture of my personal experience so far. So here's the introduction to bootstrapping. If you haven't heard of this before, maybe it'll be informative in terms of a different way to start and run companies, as opposed to what we typically hear in most of the news media. So the usual startup route is that someone has some great idea. Maybe some of you have a great idea or two, and you're thinking about how can you start that business. And most people go and try to raise, a seed round, an angel round of funding from friends and family or small investors. And then, great, they get this money, a couple €100,000, for example. But the real problem there is that you're giving up 50% of your ownership stake straight out of the gate. Of course, as they say, it can be better to have a smaller portion of a larger pie than to have the entire pie of zero. So it depends on your perspective as to whether or not that's worthwhile for you to do. And of course, your goals in terms of your lifestyle and your business. But that is a very rich transaction, expensive transaction to be making early on in the life of your business. So typically what that looks like is maybe you start with a small team or just yourself, and then you quickly grow to having office space. Obviously, remote work is now taking off, and we'll see how company spaces evolve in the future. But hiring a bunch of people, filling offices, cubicles, whether or open space, but ultimately it's a lot of cost and a lot of people and a lot of headache. So you get this great amount of money. You start up there on the top left, and that money is quickly going down while hopefully your metrics move up and to the right, but this is not a guarantee. And of course, as we know, most of these startup companies are not profitable. So the money just keeps going down. Metrics may or may not go up. And it's this balancing act of raising more money in order to hopefully improve metrics further. And eventually, there's a lot of different exit strategies, but one of those is to go public. And then it's sort of debatable whether or not you need to become profitable by that point, usually not for tech companies, but it's this balancing act of trying not to run out of money while you figure out the fundamental, metrics and growth of your business. So what that means in the end is that it's very likely that you end up with nothing, that it's a failure, or it's the unlikely chance that you end up with tons and tons of cash. But I think we hear a lot of stories about the successful companies and not enough about the failures, just in terms of the total numbers that happen in the real world. So this is sort of the typical usual startup story. But I'm here to tell you that there's another way. So what is bootstrapping in terms of how it applies to starting a business? So usually what it means, and of course people might give you different definitions, but this is how I kind of think about it as of today. And this has evolved a bit since previous presentations. So essentially does not raise outside funding. And in particular, as I showed you on the first slide there, giving up a large portion of your ownership, I guess that being more of the funding in terms of investment. Then keeping your expenses low, staying lean. So whether that's just you and a co-founder, or a small team or a group of freelancers or whatever, but keeping those expenses low so that you're more nimble. And also you try to focus on generating revenue as quickly as possible. So there's also an aspect of this that can be that it's focused on selling products online, whether digital products or physical products, but it's not necessary that that's a requirement. But that's kind of how a lot of people do it and how I've focused on doing it as well. So bootstrapping is different from the usual startup route because, as we saw before, usually you go from just yourself or a small team to a huge number of people, which costs a lot of money. But here it's more about keeping it lean, you and a small team, or with a small team, and then going back to your savings, whatever funds that you can sort of put together while you still maintain your ownership stake, to be able to then work through that as you're trying to generate revenue and keeping expenses low. So in my opinion, it really changes the conversation from, please give me some money, I have this idea, I need you people to invest. I've heard so many stories of founders trying to go out and having 100 plus hundreds of investor meetings, just trying to get that seed round put together, or trying to get their angel investment, or obviously as you go up, you just have to keep going back and asking for more and more money. Naturally, the best scenario is that these venture capitalists are searching you out, searching your company out because of the strong metrics that you're showing. However, that's not always the case. And yeah, you're just always, as a founder, basically thinking about how much runway do we have, when you're sort of always fundraising. You're always thinking about the next fundraise. But this changes the conversation from that into one where you have more time, you can grow, you focus on the revenue, but you can grow over time. It's not maybe going to necessarily make you that billion-dollar company, but it depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to build. I think it's very common for us to get attracted to that image of the billion-dollar startup, or 10, whatever, 50, $100 billion startup, but there's just a different way of doing it. And to me, that's always been much more interesting. So I think it's better because it allows you to maintain full control, or near full control. Obviously, it's up to you whether or not you give shares or a percentage of the company to your core employees and things like that. But at least you're not making that 50% or whatever it is, ownership stake change of hands early on in the business, and continue to do that throughout. So essentially, even though you might say, well, as a CEO, I don't have any bosses, actually the bosses are usually the investors, and they can be quite difficult bosses as well. So just maintaining that control, at least for some period of time. It doesn't mean companies have to be going this way forever, by the way. You could bootstrap the first couple of years, and then if you decide it's better for you to raise investment to be able to grow, then you can do that as well. But yeah, maintaining full control is a big part. You don't need to be a unicorn to be successful. So as we talked about, you don't have to have the billion-dollar company. It's more of a lifestyle business, I guess you could call it that. That's a common phrase for it. It doesn't mean that you don't do any work, or, it depends on what you want to do. Obviously, some people just want to sip a margarita on the beach, which is fantastic. But it doesn't mean that as a lifestyle business that you don't sort of have to do any work or anything. You can be as involved as you want if you get to that point, but you don't need to just gamble on trying to make the valuation bigger and bigger and grow as big as possible to be successful. And then it also enables you to have greater personal freedom. So for me, that's been a lot about financial freedom in terms of just making enough money to cover my expenses and hopefully put some away in savings, but also location freedom as well. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I've lived in a lot of different countries, but each time I've moved, I've found a local job in that market. And as a result, I don't have the benefit of the EU citizenship in any way, shape, or form as of yet. I'm working toward it here in Portugal. But as a result, being an American abroad, you have to, keep getting visas and keep getting sponsored in different countries. So from that point of view, for me, it's important to be able to also develop my own opportunities to be more, perhaps, travel more and be more nomadic when I want to, but also ultimately just to sponsor myself. So that's an overview so far of what Bootstrapped businesses are and what that means. But now let me tell you a little bit about how I've been able to do that over the last few years. So I guess I should explain a bit about why I started Expat Empire and what it is. So let me try to do that here. So for me, my process started with the Berlin Bootstrappers meetup group. So this is also how I met Thomas originally. So I was running these events in Berlin, of course, called Berlin Bootstrappers. And these events were intended to help me to meet other people that were bootstrapping businesses. Basically, I had read a number of books. I had listened to a lot of podcasts about bootstrapping, and I was really curious to meet people who'd actually done it. And I couldn't find a group or some sort of thing at the time. Even Indie Hackers was not really so big. Maybe you've heard of that, but Indie Hackers has gotten bigger and has meetup groups. And yeah, I also went to those events later on, but I couldn't find that group originally. That's probably back in 2017, I think. And so I thought, why don't I just start a meetup group myself? So I started running those events. In total, we ran 10 of them. And what was really cool was that, I mean, on the unfortunate side, I couldn't find many bootstrappers, but I found a lot of people that were interested in bootstrapping and as a concept. And so it was great to get people together to talk about it, to talk about business ideas, and to share their experiences. It wasn't just a meetup where we're just, of course, there were drinks there and things, but it wasn't just networking. I also organized 2 presentations per event. And for a lot of those events, I was giving one of the presentations, which is funny because I was just sort of talking about it in terms of a theoretical concept, how to do it, the different types of business models. But as I was building then what became Expat Empire, I also was able to start giving some presentations about my experience doing that. So it was me presenting as I was building and testing out different ideas. So as I was going through that process and meeting these bootstrappers as best as I could, but also bringing people together, I kept thinking about, all right, well, maybe it's harder to find these people, but why don't I just, start somewhere? Why don't I do something? And I looked at my career, I looked at my skill sets, I looked at my experience. As I said, I started out in finance and then I moved to product management. And then, and then after that was a couple months in China and then Japan and Germany. I didn't even really think about Portugal at that point. But I knew that what had been driving me to these different countries, that was what was more important to me. That was what was motivating me, was this idea of how do I get to the next country? How do I keep the adventure going? How do I keep traveling? And that was more important to me than the product management jobs that I was, taking to be able to do that. I still wanted to proceed and progress in my career, but the living abroad part was most important. So that basically became to me this kind of insight that what I have that's different is that I have this, living abroad type of life. So how can I turn that into a brand, into a business? And that led to this book. So essentially, when I was growing up, I started studying Japanese when I was 12 years old, and I was really always passionate about living in Japan. And I looked for a long time for someone who could help me to get to Japan, like a mentor, some sort of guide, sort of a spiritual guide even. I never could find this person. And I thought that was really, disappointing. In fact, I vividly remember in my university, I was going through the alumni database every couple of months just to see if anybody had updated their country to Japan. And I found one guy that seemed to be working in finance in Japan. I was a finance major. And I reached out to this guy 3 or 4 times over the 4 years that I was in university, and he never responded. But I kept trying, I kept looking for that mentor. So I never could find that person, but I eventually did make it to Japan, as I mentioned. And I had a lot of learnings from all of those years studying Japanese, trying to get to the country and finally getting there. And as you can see, ultimately deciding to leave Japan. So all of that, I decided, why don't I just put that together into some sort of PDF, is what I thought at first, some longer form article or like a short story practically. But those 20 pages, my goal was 20 pages originally, but that quickly became 40 pages, 60 pages, 80 pages, and then over 100 pages. And I decided to release this book. And also I should mention that I don't have a technical background. I'm not a developer. I've never studied computer science. So from all of that perspective, I also thought, what could I develop from a product point of view that I could do in my own time, that I could do by myself without hiring anybody else? And so, keep costs low again, but also was something that I thought would be interesting, would be differentiated, might have the potential to sell, although my sales targets were, admittedly quite low. It was more about getting something out into the world, some sort of digital product. And it's also this idea of a passive income, because I've already written the book, then I put it on a number of platforms like Amazon. Maybe, hopefully, people come across it and purchase it, and then I get money, sort of passively without spending more of my time. So that's the big picture of how it all started. But then where did I go from there? So I released that book in July of 2018. I started it back in 2017, I believe. So it took about 9 months to come to fruition. But also in July 2018, at the same time that I released the book, I also officially launched the website. So I was working on both of those things in parallel. And this is also while I had full-time jobs. I'll talk about that as well. But that's where it started. Then throughout 2017 into 2018 as well, I was interviewing, having conversations with friends that were fellow expats. And I've always been a big podcast fan. And I thought it would be cool to share some of these conversations with people that are interested in living abroad and in that lifestyle. And so I started basically taping those conversations and turning that into the Expat Empire podcast. And I released the first 2 episodes in December of 2018. I also started then the blog on the website, which I'll say I only put up a couple of articles until this year. So while it started then, it wasn't, not all of this was necessarily consistently going on, but I'll talk more about that as well. So then, I'll give you more of the timeline later, but I also moved then to Porto in November of 2019. And I'll give credit to a good friend of mine that was basically saying, hey, why don't you start a meetup group there and use the Expat Empire name? So I thought, hey, that's a pretty cool idea to be able to not just grow the brand and what we offer, but also to be able to meet people here, because I was new in the city and didn't know many people. So we started that in February 2020. Obviously, it was difficult to keep going amidst the lockdown. So we did a couple of events then. We did some last summer as well. And then we just started up actually this last Tuesday, we did the first event in 9 months. So good to get people together again and hopefully keep it going from here, seeing how things go. So in addition to the podcast, which I'd been doing entirely audio, as I mentioned, from December of 2018, started to think about, well, how can I get more leverage out of the podcast? So now it's also video and putting that up on YouTube. So there's a couple of other videos there, but mostly as of right now, it is the interviews of the podcast. So it's just trying to get sort of more visibility and get into different channels. And then in last month, I also released the first 2 courses on Udemy, and subsequently in the last week, put them up on Skillshare, which is maybe more of an American platform. But putting out online courses as well. So there's one thing I didn't mention in all of that, which is the consulting page. So this is something I was thinking about basically as just brainstorming different ways of trying to make money from all of this. Because as you can see, all of these are different products and different timelines, and how can we grow the brand, but what can you make money on, and things like that. So I thought consulting could be interesting. Maybe I have something to share. Maybe there's something there. And I put this page live, just expatempire.com/consulting. I put the page live in April of 2019, and I didn't announce it. I was basically, I did all the work to put it up. It took quite some work, but then I just was, basically having a lot of life changes then. So there was a lot of stuff, getting married, getting laid off from a job in Berlin, trying to find a new job in Portugal or elsewhere in Europe for that matter. So there was a lot of stuff going on in my life, and I just didn't have time to even focus on trying to get the word out, to market it. But strangely enough, it started getting some traffic, and then people started filling in the form. And I thought that was kind of cool. So randomly, once per month or per 2 months, somebody would fill in the form. I was like, okay. And I started scheduling calls with those people. And I didn't even come in at first with anything to sell. It was just an idea of like, well, maybe I could sell something. But the best way to find out what to sell is to talk to potential customers. So I would just ask them, what are your moving plans? Okay, you want to move from the US to, Australia or wherever, great. What is your biggest pain point? What's the biggest challenge that you're facing right now? What is your concern or your fear? How can I help you? How can I support you in solving that problem? And I started getting some ideas. And eventually, I started putting together a list of services and sending it over after the call. And maybe I would adjust them or things like that. But what was really interesting was just seeing the results of that. So what I was kind of trying to do, again, focusing on the revenue, was to find the money in all of these different things that we've talked about. So first was the book. Unfortunately, I mean, it's, sold some copies and things like that, but and my goals for it were very modest starting out as well. So I'm not sort of disappointed by this. All of this is just testing. But just to be, I guess, just to give you some ideas as to why it wasn't the source of money that would have been nice to have had, or sort of the dream scenario. So as you might have guessed, the book about working in Japan was a bit too niche, and I'm happy to share that information with the people that are passionate about moving to Japan. As I said, I was always looking to find a mentor, and if I can be that to somebody else, even via an ebook or a paperback, then I'm happy to do so. So I'm really glad that I created that book and I started it, and it started the whole Expat Empire thing, but it's definitely too niche. So then how about the podcast? Well, the challenge there is obviously you need to grow the listener base, which I have managed to do especially in the last months, which I'll show you later. But the challenge is that you really, really need a lot of listeners, and it's becoming, despite, in a way, podcasts are becoming so popular now, and they're so easy to start that's fantastic, but the competition is also huge. And the biggest shows are the ones that have people who are already famous. So a lot of, actors and actresses and musicians and things like that. So you need to do that. And then of course you have to actually find the sponsors that are willing to sponsor you for a long time. How much could you get is probably, there's different types of sponsorships, but a lot of it's based on how many listeners that you have. So as you can see, that's a challenge. On the blog, need a lot of readers as well. As I mentioned, I didn't really focus on the blog so much until this year, and it's been growing, and we've been releasing every 2 weeks so far. We'll see how that develops, but it just takes a lot of readers, and then you need to put ads on it and things like that. So we have done affiliate partnerships, which a lot of blogs do as well. So I mean, I've got all the pieces there. It's just a matter of, okay, you need more readers to actually make money from it. The meetup is definitely not a good way to make money. I think unless you're running, a big conference or something that people are paying a lot of money to go to, this is basically a meetup at a bar. We just have some drinks, whether it's expats, locals, tourists, whoever wants to come out. And it's a lot of fun. Really enjoy putting on the events, but you really need a lot of sponsorships. It needs to become a bigger thing and not just at the local bar to make some money from it. So yeah, it's kind of, okay, I learned that experience. It was hard to make money for the Berlin bootstrappers too. I only charged for tickets, I think, on the final event, the 10th event, and made a little over 100 euros for it. But it's a lot of work and a lot of marketing, and obviously that's not all that much money to be able to subsist on. So as you may have guessed, we're down to the last one here, the consulting page, and actually I started getting clients there, which was really cool. As I said, I started with necessarily not a real idea of what to sell. Of course, on the page, I had a few concepts, but no proposal. And by the end of a lot of conversations, I started putting out the proposal. And some people, of course, as they always do, they never get back to you and things like that. But eventually I started getting clients. So this really changed the way that I thought about the business. And again, going after the money, I basically put all of those different areas. Granted, some of them came after the consulting clients started coming in, like I said, the YouTube and the Meetup and the Udemy and so on. But now all of that is essentially content marketing to be able to drive to people finding the site, finding the services, reaching out, having this first free consulting call, consultations at the beginning, and then hopefully purchasing services after that. So yeah, it's really changed the way that I've thought about the business and how to make money. Naturally, you can make some dollars off of some of these different things, but the bulk of the money coming from the consulting services. So Udemy, as an example, I was planning at first, hopefully, for that to be a good revenue generator. But what I'm seeing is that it is also a good lead generator. So the people that buy will then reach out and so on and so forth. So you might wonder how I went full time into this, because all of this, as I mentioned, was started in 2017 with writing the book, making the website, launched in 2018, and the whole time was basically going as my side project. So what happened was, in short, I got laid off in Berlin, as I mentioned, around April 2019, finished that job in June, and then, yeah, marriage and all of this stuff. And then I was looking all over Europe for a place to work, and we were really interested in coming to Portugal. That was our top choice. But luckily, there was a company here. So it's actually a German company called Internations. It's in Munich, but they had an office here for this new division called Internations Go. And what was really amazing about this was not only that it was in the place exactly that I wanted to live, and they had a senior product manager position, which is exactly what I wanted to do, but also they focus on helping people to relocate around the world. So they go at a bit different angle than I have with Expat Empire. But I can't even imagine having found a better opportunity for me. It was so perfect. You know, it was the perfect location, perfect title, perfect type of role to actually get into the industry to help people to relocate around the world. So I joined them in November 2019, came out here to Portugal, near the Porto area, and I learned a lot about the space and worked there for a year. Unfortunately, with COVID and all that stuff, the relocation industry was not in a good spot. I think hopefully it's picking up more now. I mean, I'm seeing it in terms of the clients for Expat Empire as well. But basically, I got laid off with a lot of other people. The company went from 18 people to 8 people in one day. So that also was me and 9 other people. And so I said, okay, it's finally time. I feel like it's the right time for me to go full time into Expat Empire. So then you might be wondering, how did I finance it? So we're not getting the outside investment and so on. So as a side project for those years leading up to it, I had the full-time job. So I still tried to keep my costs very low. So it wasn't like I was funneling all of my earnings all my wages into the business. Actually, I was trying to use as many free tools as possible to keep the costs low. But I was investing in some things. You know, maybe I could have done that more in terms of hiring more help. But now that I'm focused on it full time, it's a lot more in the investing mode. So I'm using savings for sure, money from the sales, the revenue that I'm making, and those different digital products that we talked about. And I also got some employment benefits here because of the job situation. And I have applied for a startup bank loan, which has been approved, but still in the process of getting everything set up. So not a ton of money from the bank loan, but it's something. And I think the mentality there is not so much how much money it is, but rather that it is not money that's coming out of my pocket as of yet. Of course, you have to pay it back. It's a loan, but it's it's more of a mentality thing to feel more comfortable spending from outside of your own bucket of savings. So how do we make money? We kind of talked about this before, but I guess just to be clear, currently it's from the consulting services primarily, but we also work with a number of local partners. So our services are more things like helping people to figure out what visa would be right for them, figure out which country that they want to move to, doing calls with them, coaching, all these different types of services, helping them find jobs and so forth. But we don't help people as far as being on the ground in all these different countries. I mean, I'm based here in Portugal, but I'm not the one who's going to be probably going and finding real estate for somebody or doing, I'm not an immigration lawyer, so I'm not going to go and help them get their visa. So those are the referral fees. Basically, we work with partners in different countries, including here in Portugal, all around the world, that we can refer clients to that we trust, that we have good relationships with, that we hear good things about, or that we've used ourselves in many cases, like here in Portugal, to then get referral fees if they purchase anything from that company or that person. So then affiliate links as well. So these are the services that I use, that I'm familiar with, that help people with finances, with taxes, with you name it, basically related to moving abroad or, finding housing and things like that. So these different sites, we also have links that people can follow to be able to purchase their services. Then the ebooks and online courses, we talked about those, not giant sources of revenue, but they are revenue streams nevertheless. So the potential future, where could we grow into? So definitely on the sponsor side, that would be great for the podcast, for the meetup, and so on. Maybe other things that come up in the future. We also could do things like get money from ads on the blog or YouTube, but we'd have to grow very substantially to make that happen. So that's not something I'm necessarily, holding my breath for, but we'll see. Event tickets, if we were to try to do, other types of events and things like that, or other products like webinars and conferences. So all of those things are possible. And of course, I'm sure there's many more, but that's sort of what we're focused on right now. And I think the main thing for me is growing the current rather than going after brand new stuff, because as you can see, we already have a lot of different content and things that we're doing. Okay, so that's the big picture. That's the story. So I want to tell you some of the takeaways that I've had over the last couple of years doing this. So I know this is very cliche to mix passion and business, but I do think it's important. And maybe the reason that people talk about it so much is the importance. And what I want to say on this is that it's great to have passion for things, to want to try to do different things. And it's great to pursue things from a business angle and try to make money from it. But I do think, as most people say, that there is this overlap, hopefully, between your passion and a way to make money from it. It does not mean that you need to know how you're going to make money from it in the beginning. As you heard in my story, I didn't start Berlin Bootstrappers to make a ton of money. And when I tried to, or not to make a ton of money, but when I tried to make money from it, I realized how much work it was. And on an hourly wage basis, it was not a good deal. So, I didn't know what would happen. It's an opportunity for you to test, to iterate, to see what works, to make money. But what I want to say is that I believe it's very important to have an eye toward how you can turn it into money. Always be thinking about, okay, what can we test next? So for me, it was, does the podcast go anywhere? I had never made a podcast, so it was also just all of this was cool experiences to try different things, to organize a meetup group, to write a book, to make an online course recently, all of those things. So it's great to test all of that, but just have an eye toward the metrics, have an eye toward how can I turn this into revenue? Does this make money? And if so, can it scale? Can you make money from it? So I think there needs to be an intersection there, but you just need to have an eye toward it again. You don't need to know from the get-go. I also think it's great to take advantage of having a full-time job and creating things as side projects. It gives you more time. So you have the finances to invest in it, but also to, of course, cover your daily expenses, to be able to then work on this in your weekends, late at night, things like that. It gives you the time and the opportunity to iterate and to test. Like I mentioned, trying all these different things. It's pretty amazing to get the opportunity to just like go out there and make a podcast and see what happens. What's the process like, learning that for yourself and seeing if that's also of interest to you. Some people try a podcast or this or that, and it's totally not for them, but at least they know. And it's not like they quit their job to try to figure that out and find out on the negative news. And of course, you can also continue to grow your savings, or maybe at least not deplete them too heavily while you have this full-time job. However, I think it's also really important to give yourself a break. As I've put here for a shortened version of this is my wedding photo. Well, it wasn't at the ceremony, but the fun photo shoot that we did in Japan. So my wife's Japanese, but we met in Germany. But yeah, we went to Japan back in May of 2019. So as I mentioned before, I was getting laid off then. So I found out that news in April. Then we had this trip to Japan to get the legal marriage in May. And then I finished up that job in June. And at the same time, family was coming in and we were having a wedding party in Berlin, which was just kind of at the park and, more laid back and relaxed. But we had so much stuff going on. And this is exactly when I had also just put out the consulting page, like I mentioned. So it was to the point where like so much was going on that I just had to give up working on Expat Empire for a while. And I think I just put out a short podcast episode to the people that were listening to the show saying, because I had been doing episodes every 2 weeks up to that point. And I just said, look, I can't do this right now. I've got too much life stuff going on. And also I recognized that I was still I had the dream of making it into a full-time thing, but I realized I was still far away from that. I hadn't figured out what it was. I hadn't done all of the work to turn that into a full-time thing. So what it meant is that I was burning out and I had to let something go for a while. And that because I had to do my job and I had to look for the next job, and then we had the wedding thing and so on. So I had to give up Expat Empire for a while. So other life events took priority. What I always thought as I went through this, even as disappointed as I was to have to put that on the back burner, was like, do I come back to this? Will I come back to this? Do I want to come back to this? And to me, that was a great test, because when you're in the honeymoon stage of something, right, and you just keep going at it and going at it and having this great dream that it's going to be, your way out of the corporate world or whatever it is that your goal is, that's good, but eventually that will go away, and maybe other things take priority and life events come up. So would I come back to it? That was a big question for me. And how long will you allow yourself to stay away? And of course, this is more sort of philosophical, I guess. But for me, my idea was, as long as I come back to it within 1 year, then I'm good. Like, I gave myself a year. Of course, if it took 2 years, then of course you can still come back to it. It's your choice. But that was my idea. It wasn't 1 month, it was a year. So I gave myself some time to go away, see if I was still drawn to it. And the good news is that I was. I always came back to it. It was always in the back of my mind. And that was a great test for me to see that it was really important and not just this kind of fleeting interest. So on the other hand, I think you need to go full-time at the right time. So just because it's your dream and your passion and you're trying to make it work doesn't mean that you have to go and pursue it immediately. So I remember thinking at the time, okay, the job here in Berlin's coming to an end. What are we going to do? I still kind of had this idea of going full-time with Expat Empire as a possibility. But after thinking about it for a short while, I thought it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like the right timing. I didn't figure out enough to make it work. And we also wanted to move countries, hopefully to Portugal, but we weren't sure at the time. And it just didn't, like, I saw other friends, other colleagues, and people I've met over the years, acquaintances, going and focusing on their own businesses. And I was really envious of that. But I also just felt deep down that it wasn't the right time. It just didn't seem like this is what I need to do right now. I need to focus first on moving, and to do that, and to, of course, figure out the business better, then I need to keep this full-time job going. So some questions to ask yourself are, does it feel like the right time to you to go? I mean, do you feel 100% about it? If you're iffy, or if you're not too sure, then I would say, yeah, don't go for it and keep it as a side project until you feel that you were convinced. Are your metrics and the market trends going in the right direction? So the metrics for me were, I was getting some clients, I was getting some traction on the content that we were putting out. The market trend, this is more debatable. So some people would say, why would you go and create a company about moving abroad in the middle of a pandemic? I think it's a fair question. However, what I thought was, I need the time to grow awareness. I need the time to grow the business and figure things out. And there's so much that I want to do. And yeah, the timing just sort of felt right from that perspective. And I just thought, as soon as the pandemic is quote unquote over, which, is hopefully happening soon here in the next months or year, then this will go off like a rocket. This is my thinking. Maybe other people feel differently, but it seems like a lot of folks agree with that. And the traction I've received in the last couple months with a lot of Americans getting vaccinated, and most of my clients being Americans, it's definitely proven out that there is a lot of pent-up demand for this type of help. And then, of course, to look for opportunities. As I mentioned, I got laid off, and I thought, okay, this feels like the time. In fact, I was thinking before the layoff of when I wanted to change to working on it full time. So naturally, thankfully, in the end, I was laid off, because then I didn't have to make the hard decision as to when to quit. I had the answer already. So look for those opportunities in your life, but also on the money side of things, how long is your runway? How long can you keep it going? If you're only able to cover your expenses for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, I would not recommend doing this. I'm thankful to have worked, for a number of years, but also starting out in the United States. I mean, I've luckily got some savings. And I committed myself for all of this year till the end of this year at a minimum, just to see how things would go. And so I really think that you should have that, as opposed to just some people, they save 1,000 or a couple thousand and they say, let's go and do this. But I don't think, and sometimes it works. I mean, this is just my opinion, but I'm more risk adverse than that. So I'm happy to have some runway and the comfort to invest without it destroying my financial situation. So another big question that people ask is, how reliably can you replace your full-time income? So some people, before they go full-time on this, they have their side project making 100% or 80%, some high percentage of their full-time salary. And so it's, and over 3 months, like consistently, as opposed to just a one-time thing, just to make sure that you can easily make that transition. Of course, it depends on your family situation, or maybe you need to, cover your family, your kids, or things like that. So you have to play that in terms of your risk acceptance, your risk adverseness. And then the other question as well, I should mention, or I guess a rule of thumb that a lot of people say, is that it takes 3 years for you to develop your business to make the income that you're making as a full-time job. So really, if you take that in, it takes a long time. So just have that mentality. Of course, starting it again as a side project is a great way to go about it, because that starts the timer earlier. And then how much we need to invest on top of your daily living expenses. So as you'd probably guess, but might not be immediately apparent, you have to cover your rent and things like that, but then you also have to invest in the business. So for me, that's paying for freelancers a lot. So I've basically grown a freelancer team based around the world to help me to run the business. And maybe that for some people is paid marketing. I don't do that as of yet. Maybe I'll do that in the future. I'm focused on organic growth right now, because I think that's the best value you can get for your dollar or hour of work. But yeah, think about that as opposed to just, hey, I need 1,000 or 2,000 euros a month to live, or whatever your number is. All of that should come together to help you figure out the finance side. So if you build it, unfortunately, they won't care. I'm giving one example here, and this is more to show that you have to be really consistent over time. So I'll go ahead and explain the chart, because probably everyone's eyes are going straight to that. But this is the number of podcast episode downloads per month. And I only could get from the podcast hosting company, I could only get the last 2 years. So I'm showing that here. But as I mentioned, I had to kind of put everything more or less on hold. I think I put an episode out here or there during 2019. But after April of 2019, I took quite a long break from it and put out some short personal episodes to explain what was going on, like when we were moving here to Portugal. But even in 2020, there was a couple episodes released. But as you can see in December, so I left the job in, basically practically started working full-time in October of 2020 on Expat Empire, and then really did a lot on the website, but then I started reinvesting in the podcast. And as you can see, it's just kind of taken off from there, which there's many aspects of that. I've also been guesting on other people's podcasts, and some of those people start listening to your show and things like that. But I just want to show here that the consistency over time is really important. And I say that again, first, because I think the graph probably catches your eye, but it's also important what it says above it, which is finding success without an audience is hard. And I think I just sort of thought, if I make this, for example, the ebook, if I just make this book, there are going to be people that care. There are going to be people that want to know about how to get to Japan, and that's fine. That's going to be great. It's going to sell a bunch of copies. Well, it didn't. And it sold some more over time. And of course, these things can, as you can see here, they can build on themselves over time. But it's really important to have an audience. That's something I've learned. And I'm still in the process of trying to create that. That's also, with the YouTube channel, the investments into social media, all of that stuff, trying to build that audience. But the reality is that if you build it and you don't tell anybody about it, or you just announce it when it's done, then they won't care. So a lot of people now are building in public, which basically means that they're updating, with videos and different things, Twitter, tweets and all this, based on their progress as they're building something. I think that's a nice way to do it. However, what I found was that it was very difficult to do that and to build at the same time while you have a full-time job. It might be a different math or scenario if you're doing it full-time, and then you can really spend all your time on that. But I wanted to build first and put the product out there rather than focusing all my efforts on trying to grow the audience. But just be aware that if you do it the way that I did, it may take some time for you to see success from it. And as long as you go in knowing that, then hopefully it won't get you too discouraged. But it can be discouraging over time. So managing costs. So how did I manage my costs here? So I used a lot of free tools, and here's a couple examples of some key ones in my business. So HubSpot is an amazing CRM, customer relationship management tool, that it has a really strong free tier. I have live chat on the website. I do all the forms. I can do a lot of stuff with HubSpot. So I think it's really cool from a free CRM perspective. I did buy 1 year. They have a startup discount as well. So in the first year, I got a huge discount to get the next tier of service, but actually I'm not going to renew that. So I think from a free tool perspective, it's really good. I think it can do everything, but it can get quite pricey. So at least try it out for free. MailChimp has been great from an email provider. I don't know, we'll see how that evolves as the business grows, but it's been really good. And I've set up a lot of automations there, onboarding workflows for new clients and things like that. And then Canva, maybe you've heard of that, but it's really good for doing your graphics and all the graphics you need for social media and all of these things. So I really recommend that. So for paid tools, these are some that I personally use in the business. So Later is one for social media management. It's kind of more geared toward Instagram originally, but you can manage most, except for LinkedIn. They don't have LinkedIn. So we use, I think, Buffer. Right now we're using Buffer, the free tier, just for LinkedIn. But it also does Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, and all that stuff. We don't use it for all of those. We're not on TikTok or anything, but okay, so that's that. And then this one in the middle, you probably haven't heard of before, but it's called Blue Tick. So what's great about this is that I have tons of email automation sequences there, and it helps me to stay on top of my clients and get them to fill out surveys and questionnaires and sign up for calls and do all of this stuff. And I also use Calendly. Calendly is a big one for the appointment scheduling. And then Zapier, this kind of brings it all together as far as helping you to automate things. So it'll take data from one service and put it into another service. If you haven't tried it, it's really great. They also have a free tier, but pretty much to use it for a company in the way that I want to, I have to pay for it. So it's a paid tool as well. And then if you want to grow your team in terms of outsourcing things, whether individual projects, small tasks that you want to outsource, or actually grow your more sort of quote unquote permanent team of freelancers, then I think these are two great sites to do that. That's how I've done it. So FreeUp is one where you can find people to kind of be part of your team more permanently, and Fiverr, as you may have heard, is good for finding freelancers for additional help. Of course, you can keep hiring them, but it's also good for one-time tasks. And last but not least, I'd also recommend researching some alternative financing and programs. So we talked at the beginning about not giving up your ownership stake for money. And we also said that you can choose to do that down the road if you're seeing that that's the best way for you to grow. If you're really taking off and you need some growth capital, that's a great way to do it. However, if you want to stay the main stakeholder, the main owner, but at the same time also get some money outside of that, there are ways to do that. So there are government grants. This is a great way to do it. I haven't really pursued that because it's kind of, you still need to sort of show that you're in the high growth startup mindset, I think, which is basically having a founding team. Right now, it's just me in terms of the founding team. So you need to have the founding team. Usually you need to be doing some big research or big project, but that can be a great way to go. So look into it. On the bank loan side of things, I think this is good for the reason I described earlier, which is more of a mentality thing of I'm spending somebody else's money as opposed to it coming straight out of my pocket, at least at the get-go. and they can have some great loans through the government. So I'm here using, in Portugal, I'm using Microinvest program, which is basically a 7-year payback period and really a low interest rate. So I think that's pretty cool. There are also other companies that help with things like revenue-based financing. So you can get money based on the revenue that you're bringing in, especially for SaaS B2B businesses, which is not what I'm doing, but a lot of people do. So that can be cool because it's more, revenue-based, and the payback or the installment payments are based on the revenue that you're making, so that it's not so scary to have a big payment that you have to make if you're not sure, how the revenue is going to be. And then I also want to mention pre-accelerator and accelerator programs. So luckily I got into this program called Seed Ready, and you can check them out if you have a small business or just an idea even, but they're like basically a pre-accelerator program. So they're helping you to, we had, sessions over, I think it was 4 weeks, but we had 3 sessions a week where they're talking about, probably the same things that you're going through in this course with Thomas, but, just building your business, ways to do it, ways to get funding, whether investment from venture capital or other places, but also, putting together your target customer profile, MVP, all of these types of things, and building a community around it. So that was a free program, no equity, no money, and it was a great program. So a lot of these accelerator programs, maybe they take some equity from you, maybe they give you some money too. It depends. So you have to kind of look into it and see if it fits for what you're looking for. But just think about it. Again, this is something to research, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you just have to take all the money from your pocket and you're on your own and no one's there to help you. But actually there are other ways to raise capital that don't require you to give up a giant ownership stake in your business. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Definitely happy to take any questions. Thank you for having me.
Well,
so I'll stop sharing.
If nobody else has a question, I would have one.
I have.
Okay, Miriam, go ahead.
You were talking about the online courses. I was asking, did you invest in having certified coaching certificates or something? And if not, how did you earn your credibility?
Yeah, it's a good question. So no, I do not have any coaching certificates and things like that. The coaching services are relatively new. The courses themselves, you'd be amazed. You do not have to have any kind of credentials whatsoever. And what I was particularly shocked by was the low quality. I mean, I'm just being honest, but the low quality of the courses. They were, for me, this is like an open market. Okay, depending on the topic. So for me, I just did a lot of competitive research in terms of looking on Udemy for different keywords. I looked through what they were sharing, what they were talking about, how they did the video production. And all I did was I took this exact same camera, I took this exact same microphone, and I did some videos where I was just talking to the camera, some videos where I had the camera running, but also I was sharing a presentation. And that's kind of all that it took in order to get the course off the ground. And you would be amazed at the relatively, on average, low quality of the courses out there. If you're doing stuff like coding courses or data analysis, like there's so many companies trying to build these courses that there will be some higher quality stuff, but don't let that dissuade you. Don't let any of this dissuade you, like those concerns. Don't make it stop you at all. Like I had never made a podcast, and now I've got 30 something episodes, and not that that's amazing. There's people with hundreds and thousands of episodes, but it's just start it, just do it. But in terms of the credibility question, which is definitely a key part of what you're asking, I also struggled with this as well. The mentality behind it, like why, how am I credible? There's a lot of people living in different countries, right? And what I discovered, and I'm still in the process of discovering, is the fact that my story is unique. My story is unique. I've lived in a lot of different places. I've done it through finding local jobs in each of those countries. I have managed to maintain my career. Like I kept doing product management, and I didn't and nothing wrong with this, but I didn't go and teach English. A lot of people do that. That's a great way to do it, or to become an au pair, or, you know, to study a language for a while as a student. You know, there's many different ways to do it, and all of those are completely valid and great ways to make it happen. But my story is unique, and I think all of that coming together and trying to share my story and being on other people's, you know, you build your credibility by being on other people's shows, on other YouTube channels and other podcasts. You put out the blog, you put out a very professional looking website. I mean, whether or not you think my website is professional looking is up to you, but I just think relative to a lot of what I'm seeing in the quote unquote competition in the space, it's better than that. And that should be your mark, not does it look like Apple, does it look like Google, does it look like, you know, Facebook, but how does it compare to comparables in your industry for the amount of time that you've invested. And yeah, so I'm just trying to basically stay one step ahead on those areas. And I'm still in the process of developing my credibility. But after you get the first couple of clients and you do a really good job for them as best as you can, then they give you reviews. They give you like, so here's what I mean, I guess to get a very specific example. So after every service delivery, including now even the free consulting call, I automatically send a satisfaction survey. If they fill it out positively, then I also direct them to put a review onto other platforms like Trustpilot, Google, Facebook. Then at the end of the service delivery, I basically say, would you do a case study with me? Where I ask them a number of questions, or the same questions every time, but then I can put together something. A lot of people don't want to go that far, which is fine. Some people do, which is even better. But then I will say, okay, you gave me this feedback throughout the process. Do I have your permission to post that on my website? Obviously, if it was good. And then you just keep growing it from there. So on the website, I have reviews, I have case studies, and I have a referral program so that people can refer their friends to me, and they get money, and the referees get money off of the services. So those are all ways to just start it, you know, and you're always dealing with that. You're always trying to build your credibility, but yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think if I may add something, you, Mariam, asked about like certificates or something like this. I think you come from the other hand. You come from you're being an expert, on the topic itself,
Right?
Or that's at
Right.
least how I perceive you. So you talk about things you know. So
Yes.
so and then you just, you know, you just, how do you say, you put it into a you're not a method you're not an expert on the method of transporting the knowledge maybe, but you're of the knowledge itself, and now you only channel it into different ways. But that's where your reputation or your recognition comes from, because like you said, you lived it yourself, you know what you're talking about, and that gives you how do you say in English, authenticity.
Credibility.
Yeah.
Credibility.
And no, I think, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was asking because there's this myth of you have to like you were saying that there's unqualified lots of courses that gives you certificates in the coaching field, but it's just a myth. That's why I was asking, because as he said, the credibility of being there and giving online courses is about the experiences and how he got into the market, and his unique story that he's telling, how he's marketing for himself in social media, YouTubes, and that's why I was asking, because there's lots of certificates out there that are like unqualified. I don't know. I know what you were saying, that they are not qualified, and it's just a myth that they are like selling people. Thank you. That's it.
And I guess just one other thing that popped into my head is, so you do ask the question, how you develop the credibility. Well, I wrote a book, and it doesn't mean that I'm a writer. I mean, I guess technically I am, but like I'm just saying it because no one gave me permission to write a book. I didn't go out looking for a publisher. It's all self-published. It's all on digital courses on my own website. but I did, and it was really hard. And I don't know if I'll do it again. I probably won't, to be honest. It was way harder than making a course. That's what I discovered as well. At least for me, everyone has some people love writing, obviously. So it depends on your interests and your skill sets. But for me, nobody gave me permission. Nobody asked me to write a book. I just wrote a book, and whether or not people think that gives me credibility is up to them. But that's just one example, right? And now I have the courses, and it's like, hey, now I'm an instructor. So now I have a podcast. And you know what? When you have a podcast and you ask other people to be on their shows, a lot of them will say, well, why don't we do a swap? And then I have some sort of, leverage is the word that comes to mind, but I don't mean that in a negative way, just more to say I have the thing that I can give them, and they, so that we do a swap. And that's a very different conversation than, hey, let me be on your podcast. I have nothing to offer you, So I think it's just this kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of people out there that, maybe they view you very competitively and maybe they don't want to work with you or things like that. But, and some people will doubt the reviews in your website, but I can tell you they're 100% authentic. A lot of reviews on the internet are fake, but mine, I've made a point of not just like making up some fake review. Like these are real, real reviews. And I haven't had to ask any of my clients to vouch for me to a new potential client. And I'm not sure, if that'll happen or things like that, but I hope that they would say yes, because, they were kind enough to write such great reviews so far. So I think you just have to start somewhere. And yeah, it's hard to get that first one, but you just need to get that first client, that first sale, that first review, and follow up with people, try really remind them, hey, I need this review, and come at it from like, hey, I'm trying to build my business. I got a great sense of our relationship, of, the services that I was able to provide and how you seem to appreciate them. So I would love to just get that in writing and be able to put it on the website,
I have another question. Nobody else has one. What was the, how do you say, biggest accelerator for your business? Like you mentioned, sometimes in between you got laid off or switched jobs. So of course this was always a little bit, in a certain way, an accelerator, but maybe there are other accelerators which you really pushed.
Do you mean in terms of business growth or deciding to focus on the business?
No, rather in business growth.
That's a good question. I'm still figuring that out, to be honest, because these things take a long time to grow and to nurture. So I do think that being on many different platforms, so for example, I'll give a very specific example. So I had someone reach out a couple of weeks ago saying that they had actually reached out via the form on my personal blog. Which I rarely update and don't, it's just kind of a basic site, but I do have a contact form there as well. And so I was quite curious how they found me. So at the end of our free consultation call, I asked how they found me, which is obviously a great thing to do for other people that are thinking about doing something like this. And she thought about it, and she went back in her search history because she wanted to give me a more definite answer. And she had found me on Fiverr. So I also had set up a seller's page on Fiverr. I used it as a buyer to find the freelancers, but also I'd set up a long time ago, I had put together about 7 different gigs, as they call them, which is the things that you're selling on the site. And I just wanted to see what would come from that, because these are sites that millions of visitors go to. So maybe it would be a good lead generator. I didn't find that to be the case at the time, so I shut them all down. I just turned them off, but I still left them on there. I didn't delete them. And then I decided, well, maybe I should give it another shot and just turn one of them on, not all 7, but just one, and focus on that and see if anything comes from it. And it turns out that she found me on that one ad on Fiverr, and she didn't contact me on Fiverr, but then she went to the Expat Empire website, she read my story, then she went to my blog, and then she contacted me. So you never know how these things will happen. But the point, from my point of view, again, because I'm trying not to spend as of yet on paid marketing, I know that it's always there, but I'm just, having spent on paid marketing in the past as a growth manager and things like that, I know that it's a lot of times a big sinkhole, and you really have to figure out how to convert those people. So I haven't done that, but I've focused on growing the content, and I've focused on putting Expat Empire and me. I mean, not to raise myself up, but just as kind of an image of the company in a sense because of my experience. And I do a lot of the service delivery myself as well. So I put all of that into as many platforms as possible. So I have the podcast. That's just one example, but I put that podcast onto every podcast network that I can find. So it's available to anyone who's searching expat, for example, or maybe other keywords, but obviously they'll bring it up. So I have that. Then I have, again, like I mentioned, putting those now as videos on YouTube. So now building the YouTube channel, because there's some people who just search YouTube all the time. That's not me personally. I watch some videos on there, but some people do their research on YouTube, not on Google, right? Then I have the blog. So trying to get that on the SEO and of course the site itself. Then you have now the courses. A big part of the course was to put it on Udemy because millions of people go there. And I don't have a huge audience. Like I mentioned, that's the hard part, is to sell and to find that audience. But now maybe they're on Udemy searching and they're going to find me. And then maybe they'll go to the website. Maybe they'll purchase the course. Maybe they won't, but there's the awareness part. So those are just some examples, but also, yeah, being on other people's shows, being on, and getting those referral agreements in place so that if they have people that I can help, then they bring them to me. If I have people that they can help, then I send them their way.
So what I hear out of it, it's the mix who's pushing you.
Yeah.
It's the kind of different being present everywhere, but not just put all the money in one number.
Right.
Okay, I have another question. It's the way you describe your career and how you become an entrepreneur finally is very, very, yeah, it's the story of your life in a certain way, how it developed in a very natural way, or at least it seemed to me. But looking back now to the last 10 years, is there something special which you would say, like, okay, with the experience I have now, I probably would do differently because this would be a kind of a shortcut, or this would have been that was a missed opportunity or something like this, which you could then do differently if you would?
Yeah.
If you could.
Nothing immediately comes to mind. And also, I think what I want to say to that is, and not to sound, I don't know, conceited or pompous or boastful or anything, but just as I look at it right now, I think the things that happened at exactly the right time and in the right way. And I honestly believe that because, as I mentioned, I studied Japanese since I was 12. My dream was always to get to Japan. I finally got to Japan and I left after 2 years, and basically job-related reasons, and coming to Berlin to find some new work opportunities and new life experiences. And if, just as one example, my goal was to be in Japan for a lot longer than 2 years. That had been my dream. I'd studied for so long, I'd prepared for so long, and I finally got there. And so, of course, when I left Japan, it was also exciting, but definitely heartbreaking. So you could look at that and say, well, it didn't work out in Japan. I didn't make it, I failed in some form or fashion. But on the other hand, now that I did Germany and now that I've done here in Portugal, I am absolutely in this right spot, not only geographically and, culturally, and frankly, a lot of people want to move here to Portugal. So it's an amazing place to be, not just on a personal level. I came here for personal reasons, like I wanted to live in Portugal, but it's also the perfect place to be because so many people want to move here for the visas and the tax situation and the lifestyle and everything that Portugal has going on. So it's great from a business level, but also most importantly, I can look at all of those experiences also with a few months in China, a few months in Singapore. And then I really have the story to say, look, I've done this, I can do this, I can help you to do this. And if I had just stayed in Japan the whole time, even if I tried to do this, not only are there a lot of people, including, Japanese people who, or, half Japanese, half, American or whatever people that are doing this in Japan. And so that's already difficult because I'm not going to have the legal qualifications, even though my Japanese is very good. I'm not going to be, fluent like a native person. So I wouldn't really be able to stand out in that way. And of course, then again, I'm also working with only people going to Japan. I'm a person who's of the world, I like to think, or like many different countries and not just one place. And as a result, I like to work with people who are moving all over from anywhere to anywhere is what we try to do. So I've also built the business and the idea behind it and the message based on my own experience and what I think is, important, but I have the exact experiences to be able to make that happen. And I really feel like in terms of the timing, not just the multiple country experience and everything else, but yeah, again, being here in Portugal, finding the way to get here, the visa, having the 1 year working at another relocation company, trying to do a very similar thing. All of that then led me to actually going full time with it. So it would be nice, of course, you'd love to get to these insights or these great places in life or whatever as quickly as possible. But I do think that things happened. It took many years, but it happened in the right way over the right time for the right reasons.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. You were talking about the financing. You were not for government grants, and you think bank loans are more. What was more beneficial for you? Would you explain that more? Why didn't you go for government grants?
I would absolutely love to go for government grants, so I don't want you to take away that sort of message that was not good and a bank loan is good. I actually think government grant would be even better. The challenge there was being a bootstrapper, doing what I wanted to do to be able to get the government grant. So normally it seems like from the handful that I've seen, and of course I've been looking here in Portugal, so I don't know how it is in Germany, and every country's different and they have different programs. So you really have to look case by case basis. But all the ones that I've seen here have generally wanted you to have a full founding team. So I'm a solopreneur, I guess you could call it. I do it by myself, at least as of yet. And as a result, I don't have the founding team, of people, and maybe they want you to be working on a specific topic. And even the ones that are travel related that I've seen here in Portugal, because tourism is a big part of the economy here, it tends to be things about sustainability for hotel industry, tours, and that's great, but none of that, like, I don't fit into that box. And that was the basic problem. So I'm coming at it from an angle of like, what can I do as I am doing the things I want to do and not trying to fit into one of those government grant boxes. So if you do fit into that, or you can fit into it, then by all means go after it. I think that's probably the best way to do it, because maybe you have to put up some money and maybe the government puts up another half, or maybe they just give you this government grant, or everything has different requirements and what you have to do, but hopefully you don't have to pay the money back, whereas I do have to pay the money back as a loan. So I think if you can do the government grant, then that's great, but yeah, you have to do a lot of paperwork, a lot of processes, applications. You have to fit their box exactly.
So theoretically, government grants is perfect, but practically the bank loans is more efficient or more practical to use. When you're starting up and when you're not very well prepared, and you don't have, like you said, the family thing. So it's the bank loans which is more practical, not theoretically.
I suppose, again, it depends on how much you want to raise. It depends on your situation, depends on how able that your business, or your idea or whatever it is that is able to meet the requirements there. So with a bank loan, they're just going to look at it from, does this look like a viable business idea? Does he have anything to back it up? For me, it's a small amount of money, and for the bank too. It's a very small amount of money. So it's not like 100,000 euros, or you can get way more money from a government grant, but the process is going to be a lot more intensive.
Thank you.
Talking about the banking and the public loan or public support topic, I think it depends on two things. First of all, how much money you want to raise, and are you able to raise it at all, in the sense of, are you worthy, credit worthy to the bank or not? So a lot of times you don't have the opportunity to go to banks, so it depends on how much money you want to raise, and if it's a lot of money, then it's worth going through the hassle of applying to these public fundings. If it's just a small amount, it might be too much of a hassle. And that's, I think, also for you the case, as I got it.
Yeah, exactly. The idea of I mean, we talked about this in terms of the venture capital investing as well, but like the idea of spending all my time preparing for and going to pitches to try to raise money is really not appealing to me. I'd rather focus on growing the business and talking to customers and doing all those things. So I think that also influences it a bit. I mean, that being said, this process to apply for the loan has also taken 6 months. So, you know, I mean, yeah, my situation's a bit unique, and I won't get into the details of it. But you know, basically, there's a government-appointed agency that's helping me do it, and they're translating everything to Portuguese and so on. So they've helped a lot. But and it hasn't been 6 months of straight work. It's been a lot of, you know, do something and then wait and then get feedback and do this and that. So, but if I look back at it now, I don't know if I would have gone through the process, but now that I'm here, well, I'll take some cash.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I don't know if there are any other questions, but if there's not, I'd ask you also one more thing, which I always ask all the founders in our course. If there's one book you would recommend to us, which as a founder you strongly recommend that we read, what book or TED Talk or whatever it would be then, but what book would you recommend us?
Yeah, the one that has had the biggest impact on me as a bootstrapped, you know, solopreneur founder kind of situation. You know, a number of people would say things like the 4-hour work week and all that, which I think is fine reading. But what really intensely kind of affected me and changed the way that I was thinking was this book called The E-Myth Revisited. And I believe that's the name. Let's double check. Yeah, E-Myth Revisited. So it's by Michael Gerber. And the reason this book is so good, and a lot of people in this space recommend it, is because it really changes the way that you think about how to run a business as a solopreneur. So the basic conceit or the concept, and it's the E-Myth, is that, let's say, for example, and the example they use in the book is, let's say that you're a great baker and you can bake amazing pies and people love them and everything. So as a baker, when you're working for another company, then all you do is make the pies. And that's great. But then you think, well, I want to, you know, I don't like working at this place. I want to go out on my own. All I need to do is just make my pies and sell them. And that's awesome. Then I can make that happen. And what most people find is that, well, actually, when you go and do that, then you have so much more accounting, you have sales, you have marketing, you have all of these aspects that were covered by the company. And all you want to do is bake pies. So if you want to just bake pies, then you should go back to your job. If you want to be an entrepreneur, then you need to get people to help you. You need to outsource. You need to build a team around it. You need to change your mentality and change your skill set to match that. So for me, it would be the way that I've applied it in terms of the business so far is that the easy way would be for me to just deliver all the services myself. You know, I've done the experience of moving around the world. Doesn't mean I know every visa situation in every country, obviously. So, you know, there's a lot of research there, but I could just do it all myself. I'm the person who's done it before. I started the company. Why don't I just do it? Well, there's a huge bottleneck, which would be me, and also all of the work around marketing and sales and, you know, all that stuff that I have to take on anyway to actually deliver the services would be extremely ineffective and inefficient. So that's why I've built this team around me. I have someone helping me with the videos of the podcast. I have a social media manager who also helps with a couple other things. I have people that just work on just the services. I have a person helping me write blogs. As I mentioned, the blog, I wrote a couple, but I really started up again this year. Well, the reason for that is I found somebody that I can outsource the work to. We work together really well. We knew each other in another context. He's a great writer. And that's been amazing because now I'm able to be an editor, not the writer. I get to edit the first draft, and then we work together to come to the final draft in fairly short order. So all of those things have helped me to leverage my time and focus on the things that are the bottlenecks, as opposed to being the one person having to do everything, which would stress me out, which would hinder our growth, all of that stuff. So anyway, yeah, to answer the question, E-Myth Revisited, I think is a really good book. And if this topic is interesting to you at all, I definitely recommend picking it up.
Then I think we're done for today. great having you here. Thanks a lot. If there's no more questions, I'd say great job. I think we got a good impression on not only on what bootstrapping is and how you can do it, but how it worked out for you actually. So it was a good combination of knowing your story and getting the theoretical background of bootstrapping. So thanks for that. Hope to have you on the show next year again.
Hopefully I'll have some more updates. Yeah.
From wherever.
Sounds good.
But yeah, it was great having you. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you.
And talk to you soon.